Welcome everybody to our judges course that we'll be running today. It's a beginner's course, so if you have already done a beginner's course, you're going to need to do the advanced one, but welcome everyone who are beginners. My name is Kate Shepherd. I have put this course together for you. I have recently judged at the Commonwealth Games, I've judged at World Cup, and I've judged at multiple Grand Prix and World Junior Championship events. So that's why I will be hosting you this morning during your judges course. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen and we're going to do a presentation. Okay, so most of these rules that you're going to see now in this presentation have been directly quoted from the FINA diving rules. So you can see sometimes they get a little bit repetitive, but we'll be working through them together. Okay, so if I just give you a little bit of a basis, because it's a beginner's judging course, we're going to pretend that you don't really know much about diving. So we're going to go through all the elements that we judge in a dive. We're going to go through the positions that you're going to see the divers in the air doing. And we are going to be looking at the deductions. So you'll see after each element, we'll go through the deductions that you'll take off for things that you are judging. And then we'll go into some synchronized diving and we will end off with some of the golden rules. Okay, so to start off, we have 5 elements to dive. The starting position, the approach, the takeoff, the flight, and the entry into the water. So starting with the starting position, the signal will be given to you by the referee. This is normally with a whistle. At international events, sometimes they'll hold up a flag. And in the starting position, the body shall be straight, the head erect, with the arms straight in any position. So sometimes you'll see the divers starting with their arms down by their sides, or they need to be nice and straight, or like the picture to the right, with their arms straight out at the sides. Okay, so here's some more examples of starting positions. The first picture on the previous slide was the back takeoff. Then we have the arm stand takeoff, the left-hand picture there. And then we go on to the hurdle takeoff. So in a standing dive, when executing a standing dive, the feet must stay in contact with the springboard or platform until the takeoff. That will be for standing backwards or forwards on the end of the board. And then for the hurdle, the starting position in a running dive shall be assumed when the diver is ready to take the first step of the run. And you can see that in that picture there on the right. And then in an arm stand, the starting position in an arm stand shall be assumed when both the hands are on the front end of the platform and the feet are off the platform. And obviously the feet come off the platform as it starts. So it's the moment the feet are leaving the platform for the start of the handstand. And the deductions for the starting position. When the body in the starting position is not straight, head erect, and with arms straight in any position, you can deduct half to 2 points depending on how bad their start is. If their arms are super bent or skew, if they're standing skew on the board, if they're leaning forward, you can deduct depending on how bad it is. If the feet leave the springboard or platform before the takeoff. Sometimes like on a backwards takeoff, you'll see the divers, when they start their swing, their feet hop on the board a little bit extra. So that's called a crow hop. And when an arm stand dive, a stationary and steady balance in a straight and vertical position is not shown. This is quite an important part. And the dive needs to be, the handstand needs to come up and it needs to stop and it needs to stay there. There isn't a specified amount of time, but it needs to be stationary and vertical. And we deduct those 2 points if you don't get into that position. What's important with this when we're judging on platform is because there's 5 elements to a dive and the handstand becomes a 6th element, when they are not doing that starting position correctly, you take off an extra 2. So let's say you're judging out of 10 and they don't do their handstand well at all. You put 2 on your fingers and then you judge the remainder of the dive and let's say you're going to give the rest of the dive 8, you need to take the 2 off that you would have done for the handstand, and hence you end with 6. But I can touch on this again a little bit later once we have more of an understanding of the full dive. Okay, then we get to the approach. You can see at the bottom on the screen is a picture of the full approach and even the dive in flight. So when executing a running dive from either the springboard or the platform, the running dive shall be smooth, aesthetically pleasing, and in a forward direction to the end of the springboard or platform, with the final step being from 1 foot. Now that little line at the end there that says the final step being from 1 foot, so I'm going to put my mouse on the screen. It's referring to this part here, okay, because we do some steps down the board, as you can see in this first picture. And then we go into the second picture with the diver doing their last step. Then they will lift their leg and their arms, and then they touch down. This point is not their last step, it's their takeoff. So we're looking for a last step over here. You can see sometimes divers bring that leg through and they touch the board and they're actually taking off to there. That means it's a fail dive. So when the final step is not from 1 foot, this is what I was just referring to, the judge may award 0 points. Okay. The dive must not double bounce at the end of the springboard or at the end of the platform before the takeoff. So at this point here, when they're leaving, once they land, they can't do another jump before they leave the board. Okay, and our deductions for our takeoff, a half to 2 deduction is when the run is not smooth, aesthetically pleasing, or in a forward direction to the end of the springboard or platform. And as we touched on, it is completely failed if there is a double bounce. Okay, there's just a little picture over there. It's just for some humor. So we now get to the takeoff. The takeoff in the forward and reverse dives may be performed either standing or running at the option of the diver. Sometimes there will be like a rule that we've stated for ourselves as South African diving or as CGA diving, that the diver may not take off in a standing position. You are required to do a hurdle for your forward and reverse takeoffs. And then your takeoff in a backwards and inwards must be performed standing, obviously backwards on the board. The takeoff from the springboard shall be from both feet. We've touched on that. And it says here the reverse takeoff from the platform may be performed with 1 foot. And if I'm dead honest with you, I've never seen a diver in my experience diving from 1 foot off the platform. In a running and standing dives, the takeoff shall be bold, high, and confident, and shall be from the end of the springboard or platform. So you're looking, when you do deductions, you're looking to make sure that you're looking for bold, high, and confident takeoffs. So we get to the deductions, a half to 2 deductions when the takeoff is not bold, high, and confident. We just touched on that. And in twisting dives, the twist shall not be manifestly done from the springboard or the platform. That's also a half to 2 deduction. So you'll see when divers are twisting, sometimes they turn around on the board and they do a forward dive. And that's not a back dive half twist. So depending on how bad that movement is, then you take off half to 2. And it's completely failed when the takeoff from the springboard is not from both feet, then it's 0 points. Okay, flight. Okay, flight gets a little bit complicated because we have so many different positions within the flight that you can see here. So during the execution of a dive, the dive shall be in a direct line of flight to the board. So you'll see often, specifically on inward dives, the divers will move to the side of the board because they're worried that they might hit the board. We then deduct for that. And we're now going to move into the various positions that you're going to see the divers doing in the air. Okay, so you've got straight, pike, tuck, and free position. And next to those words, I've put their letter which corresponds to that position, which you'll see on a dive number. Okay, so we get to the straight position. In the straight position, the body shall not be bent either at the knees or the hips. Sometimes you'll see the diver's knees bending through a straight position. And the feet shall be together and the toes pointing. The position of the arms is at the option of the diver. So that normally means that they'll be by the diver's ears, or they'll, like in this picture, they'll be towards the side of the diver. Okay, in the pike position, the body shall be bent at the hips, but the legs must be kept straight at the knees. The feet shall be together and the toes pointed. The position of the arms is at the option of the diver. In pike, the dives with a twist, the pike position must be clearly shown. You can see there the diver has chosen to put their arms around the back of their kneecaps. Sometimes divers tend to put their arms again towards the side in an open pike position. The tuck shape. In the tuck position, the body shall be compact, bent at the hips, bent at the knees, and the hips with the knees and feet close together within the body line of the shoulders. The hands shall be on the lower legs and the toes pointed. What's important to note with that point is the knees need to be within your shoulders. If the divers are doing a split tuck, which means they're opening their legs quite wide and their knees are outside the borders of their shoulders, then it's also a deduction. And it also impacts the overall impression of the dive. And that's mainly seen in the bigger dives when the divers are trying to get in lots of somersaults. And especially we need to watch out for it in a men's category. So in tuck dives with a twist, the tuck position must be clearly shown. Then we get to the free position, or sometimes it's called optional position. In the free position, the body position is optional. Okay, so they can be doing straight, pike, or tuck, but the legs shall be together and the toes pointed. In somersault dives with the twist may be performed at any time during the flight. So you can see here is a beautiful twisting position. Often what happens is divers will be, let's say, doing a forward 1.5 somersault, 1 pike. They'll be quite piked at the beginning, then they'll twist and then they'll pike again at the end. Or for a back 1.5 somersaults, half twist, they'll do their twist and then they'll tuck around at the end. So free position is often a combination of being straight for the twist and being in a tuck and a pike shape for the ending of the dive. So we get to the deductions. This is quite a long list of deductions. And we come now to things that are a little bit different from a half to two deduction or from a failed dive. So they're very few according to your own opinions, because it becomes quite a difficult thing to judge, because it's much easier to know that you're taking off half to two. So you just need to be wary of according to your own position. But according to your own position, if during the execution of a diver dives to the side of the direct line of flight, so if they're diving really badly to the side and they're ending with a cast, then obviously you're going to take off more than if they were just a little bit to the side and you could hardly really see it. If during the execution of a diver touches the end of the springboard or the platform with his feet or hands. Note here, they're not saying head. Often, if a diver is touching the board with their feet or their hands, it doesn't actually affect the rest of their dive. So if they're obviously doing it in 1.5 pike and they hit the board with their feet and the rotation stops and they kind of collapse into the water, that's going to be a much bigger deduction than if they come around and the end of their toes tap the board and they can still finish the dive beautifully. So that's why there's you can't just deduct half to two for that, because it can be quite varied. A half to two deduction should the position not be aesthetically pleasing and shown as described. Then a maximum 2, when the dive is performed clearly in a position other than that announced. That's like if we're supposed to be doing a forward 1.5 pike and we're doing a forward 1.5 tuck. Normally it means the diver didn't listen to the dive that was announced and they've then done the wrong position. It's also a maximum 2 if during the execution of a dive, the diver is unsafely close to the springboard or platform or touches the end of the springboard or platform with his head. The judge shall award up to a maximum of 2 points. This point is a very important point because the judges send out a message to the divers. And if the divers are dangerously close, they need to know and they can't be awarded for that. So what will happen is, I think we also need to make it clear that dangerously close is with their head. If you hit the ball with your feet, it hasn't been a dangerously close encounter with the board. Dangerously close as if it's going to cause a bad injury. So it's saying here that if the diver is coming around and their head is coming really close to the board, or they're diving to the side of the board and they've gone through the board, then you need, as a judge, to give it a maximum of 2. And then you raise your hand to say why you've given it 2. Because otherwise the diver's a bit confused, doesn't know that they've gotten a 2 for coming close. So if you raise your hand and you're given a 2, in a panel of 7 judges, the majority being 4, means the entire dive will be deemed a maximum 2 dive, and all the judges that have a score of 5, 5.5, anything above 2 will be moved down to a 2 score. If it's 3 out of the 7 judges, then you've just given your 2 and everyone else has given their scores and we move on. It's a feeling that you get if you've jumped in your chair or you've moved slightly to the side, then the dive has been too close. Okay, entry into the water. The entry into the water shall, in all cases, be vertical, not twisted, with the body straight and the feet together and the toes pointed. The dive is considered to have been completed when the whole of the body is completely under the surface of the water. It's important to note here when we judge an entry, you do not judge what happens underneath the water. Okay, we judge only what we see above the water. Okay, and the deductions for the entry. Here we introduce. Okay, so we've come to the deductions for the entry. According to our own opinion, which is being introduced again, when the entry is short or over, twisted, or the body not straight, the feet not together, and the toes not pointed. This is according to our own opinion. So you can see there's that twist that we're talking about. That's a slight twist. Whereas, as you can see below in the failed section, it says when the entry for a twist is greater than that announced by 90 degrees or more, that's completely failed. If it's a slight twist, then we just deduct according to our own opinion. And then maximum 4.5, if one or both arms are held below the head on a head first entry. So that's if the diver goes in with their hands below their shoulders, obviously below their head is the rule, then we maximum 4.5. And in the same way, we just turn the dive around, if one or both arms are held beyond the head on a feet first entry. And we often see that when in like a school competition and the child is doing a forward somersault, often they come up, they put their hands above their head. But obviously we see that in other competitions too, so you need to just be aware of that. Okay, so now we've come to synchronized diving. Synchronized diving is judged by the execution of the individual dives and the synchronization of the divers. So there's pretty much two different panels when we're judging synchronization. You've got your execution judges, that's normally 4 of you, or it can be 6 of you. If it's 4 of you, then there's 2 people on each side of the pool, and you are judging the diver that's closest to you on your side of the pool, and you're completely ignoring the other diver on the other side. You're just marking it, following the rules that we have just looked at. If you are judging the synchronization of the divers, you will be a panel of 5 or you'll be a panel of 7. If you're a panel of 5, there'll be 2 on one side of the pool and 2 on the other side of the pool, and you are all in line with one another. So you work up in height. So someone, let's say, is sitting on the floor, then someone sitting on a chair, then someone standing, then someone sitting on a high chair. That'll sort of be how that judging works. So we're all seeing the same line of sight, and then you are judging the 2 pairs diving together in their synchro. Okay, so the execution judge must only watch the diver on their side and judge them according to individual rules. The factors to be considered in judging synchronized diving are as follows: the starting position, the approach, and the takeoff, including the similarity of height is what you're looking for. Just take note, the starting position. Often you'll see divers, one standing a lot more in front than the other, so the other will be standing further away from the end of the board, and one will be standing closer. You have to deduct for that. It's something that gets pointed out to us all the time at international events, because it's easy to forget that the starting position still counts as something that we are judging. Then we're judging the coordinated timing of the movements during the flight, the similarity of the vertical angles of the entries, the comparative distance from the springboard of the platform of entry, and the coordinated timing of the entries. So you want to see that the divers are somersaulting at exactly the same time through the air. It's sometimes easier to see in pike because you'll see the one leg sticking out and the other one, a little bit further behind. Then the angles of entries, you're deducting if you see one going over and one going short, or if they're going in exactly the same time at the same angles, then that's brilliant. Although if they are both short, you've still got to deduct some synchro marks there, because the synchro, it does take into consideration the angle of entries. You can't give a 9 to divers that are completely synchronized and then short. Then the distance from the board, the divers need to be the same distance. You can't have one that's in the middle of the pool and one that's come close to the board. You want to see that they're entering together. And then the coordinated timing of entries. You don't want to hear ba-ba. You want to hear that then hit the water together. So basically, when you're watching synchro, you want to see one diver for the entire dive. If you are a synchro judge and you can only see one diver, that is a brilliant synchro dive. Okay, so deductions for synchronized diving. A failed dive, if one or both divers perform the incorrect dive. So you can't have somebody doing a forward dive pike and another doing a forward 1.5. If one diver enters the water while the other is still on the board. You'll see this often if the divers have not timed their hurdles properly. One will be entering the water and the other one's still up on the top of the board. If both execution judges of one diver in the 9 panel or 3 execution in an 11 judge panel award 0 points. If all the synchronizations award 0 points. Okay, so that's a failed dive. And then a 1/2 to 2 point deduction. The similarity of the starting position, approach, takeoff, or flight, coordinated timing of the movements during the flight, similarity of the vertical angles of entry, comparative distance from the board from the springboard or platform on the entry, and coordinated timing of the entries. So that's those points we touched on earlier, is a 1/2 to 2 point deduction. Okay, so now that you have an understanding of what diving is, what you are looking for, we move now onto the FINA judging scale. Okay, so this is an exceptionally important scale, and I don't think that I can stress it enough. It's something that you will get asked in a test or exam. If you're diving internationally, they always judging internationally, excuse me. If you in a judges meeting, they'll say, hey, you over there, stand up, come here and write this down on the board for us. And you have to get up and you have to write it down in front of all the judges from all the other countries. So it's a really important thing to have just stored in your brain. And it's something that you'll always refer to when you're judging. So failed, completely failed is a 0. And satisfactory is a 1/2 to 2. Deficient is a 2.5 to 4.5. Satisfactory is a 5 to 6.5. A good dive is from 7 to 8. A very good dive is 8.5 to 9.5. And an excellent dive is a 10. So often when you're judging, the easiest way to do it is you watch a dive, you think, yo, that was brilliant. That was a very good dive. You know that you're scoring that diver between an 8.5 to a 9.5. And then you need to think, okay, is that at the top end of the scale or am I at the bottom end of the scale? Was it worth a 9.5? Let me think. Maybe not. Maybe I've deducted half because they were slightly forward on takeoff, and I'm deducting half because they were quite splashy on entry. Then, okay, fair enough. We're probably sitting on about a 9. Okay, that's how we do it. Or you think, oh my word, that was really not up to scratch. You're probably sitting in the deficient category. And then we're gonna say, okay, we know we can give between a 2.5 and a 4.5. How bad was it really? Was it really, really bad? Should I be giving it maybe a 3? Or should I be sitting more on a 4.5? So you've got to decide which category you're putting it in, and then you decide where in that category does the dive fit. Does it fit on the top end of the category, or does it fit at the bottom end of the category? Okay, we've come to the duties of a judge. when we're judging, it's exceptionally important to listen to the dive that is announced and check the dive number. So you'll often see if it's kind of and check the dive number, because you'll either hear the person announce it and then you know, okay, perfect, we're looking at a 4 1.5 pike, or if you're judging on judging pads, then you'll see on that pad that it'll say a 103B. So you just need to know your dive numbers, but you need to listen to it so that you're aware of what dive you're supposed to be watching. So now we know the dive number, then we have to picture it in our mind and know what the dive must look like. We know a forward 1.5 pike needs to have straight legs. We know that there's probably going to be a hurdle. We know that they're going to do 1.5 somersaults. You have to pay attention to the dives. Sometimes divers will enter a front double twister and then they realize, oh my word, I can't actually do that. So they do a front single twist, hoping that no one will notice. That dive needs to be failed because they haven't done the dive that they've entered. Okay, so you need to pay attention. You make sure they've done the right amount of somersaults. They've made the right shapes, that they've done the right amount of twists. We really need to picture that dive in your mind and make sure that that dive is the one that was executed. And as soon as signaled, you must have your score ready without looking at the other scores. So when the announcer says awards, that's when you put your score up. Or the moment the divers enter the water, you need to sit and put it into your pad so that it can then be reflected onto the screen. So it's important that you do that, because otherwise it looks like you don't know what you're doing and you're copying everyone else's scores. And you don't want to look at everyone else's scores because you are judging what you're seeing. Okay, so you should never be apologizing for your scores. If you know what you're doing, then you will be fine. Okay, I think this is our final slide, and it's the golden rules that we need to remember as a judge. Okay, so knowledge of the sport. Keep your eye in by watching diving often. Whether you go into the pool to watch your daughter dive, or you can see that there's world championships on the TV at home, you really need to make sure that you're keeping your eye in, that you're watching dives, you're watching big dives, you're watching simple dives, that you're watching as much diving as possible. Especially when you're about to be judging a big event, you need to make sure that you go through your rules, and that you, sometimes when I'm judging internationally, I'll sit in the hotel room and I'll watch a YouTube video on the Olympic Games from Rio in 2016, and I'll judge with those judges just to make sure that my eye is in check. Okay, then you must not be biased. Okay, biased judging is unacceptable, and internationally you'll be taken directly off the panel and they will not put you on competitions again. It's not right and it's not fair, and we don't do that as judges in South Africa. You need to try and use your entire scale when you're judging. So it's really not nice for the divers if they're all getting 5s all of the time. You really want to try and differentiate between what's really good and what's not so good. And sometimes it's really hard to get out of that middle category, that satisfactory category from 5 to 6.5. You really want to make sure that a dive that's not great is getting lower marks, and a dive that's really good is being rewarded and getting those 8.5s. You need to judge independently and not be influenced by any other factors. So these factors are other judges being biased, or the fact that, you just need to make sure that you are focused and you're judging what you see. You're not copying anyone else's scores, or you're not being biased. Do not make up for mistakes. This is a very difficult one. Often you see a diver do a dive and you're like, yo, that wasn't so great. And you give it a 4.5, and let's say everyone else has given it a 6. Then you go through the round and you're thinking the whole time, oh my word, I can't believe I've just given that diver a 6, a 4.5. And then they get on the board again and you're like, oh, okay, this is the same diver. And then she does her dive and you give the diver a 7, and now everyone's given a 5. So you're not now trying to catch up on the awards you've given wrong before. You've got to try and forget that was the score that you've given. It was a mistake. That's why we have panels of 5 to 7 judges, so the incorrect scores can get crossed out. So you need to really try and just judge what you see on that specific dive. And the same goes in that point. Do not make up for mistakes. You don't want to give 4.5 and then you just keep giving 4.5 the whole time because you haven't accepted that you've made that mistake. So now everyone else is on 6 for all of the 4.5s that were beautiful, and you're staying on 4.5. You need to adjust, you need to realize that maybe you were wrong there, and then you need to come back up to be within the panel. Obviously, you're still judging for yourself though. Okay, do not respond to biased judging. We touched on that earlier with judge independently. So if a diver from another country is diving and let's say they're from France, and then the French judge is giving them 10s the whole time, and then the South African diver gets on the board and you also give the South African diver 10s, or you give the French diver 5 because you know their judge is giving 10s. Don't respond to it, ignore it, it's not your problem. They will be spoken to about it, their scores will most likely be crossed out, so it's not something that you need to worry about. Do not let the degree of difficulty influence the award. This is also quite a difficult one, because what happens is when a diver is diving and they do a forward 2.5 pike or a reverse 2.5, we all like, oh wow, they made it, amazing, and we go and give it a 7, when really it was worth a 4.5, because we feel so proud of the diver for being able to achieve something like that. All the dives have degree of difficulty for that reason. So doing a reverse 2.5 and getting a 4.5 is still going to be better than doing a reverse dive and getting a 6. So we need to just keep that in our mind's eye. You just judge, dive, what you see. And we must also be careful of being too critical of the basic movements, because there's a lot less to judge. It's much easier to notice mistakes. So you need to be careful of not being too critical of those basic dives. Do not be concerned with who is winning or who is losing, especially if the results are being put up on a board that you can see. Make sure you do not even turn your head in the direction of the board, and do not be worried if your dive is coming first or last. We just judge the competition as if we've never seen those divers before. And then the question you have to ask yourself relates to the first point: am I trained enough to judge today? Have I looked through my rules? Have I been keeping my knowledge of the sport up? Do I know what's going on? And sometimes you're just having a really bad day and you can't judge. You need to speak to the head of judges and say, listen, I actually need to put the reserve in today because I don't think I'm going to be doing a good enough job. Because what's really important, I said it earlier, is that we're sending a message to the divers, and we are the ones that decide who comes first, second, and third. And that's a really big deal. We, the people that place these divers in their positions, and we need to make sure that we know our rules and that we know what we're doing to make sure that the correct divers are coming in the correct places. Okay, we have come to our first video. We're going to be watching a few videos through this course. It is quite difficult to find variety, so I've got a few videos of us together, and hopefully if you're in a judges meeting before a competition, you'll also be shown a few videos to get your eye in, to discuss, to make sure the panels are on the same page as each other. But we're just going to look now just to get kind of a feel of what we're looking for. So we now have Jennifer Abel, who's doing a reverse 2.5 somersaults and pike on the
reverse 2.5 somersault and pike.
Okay, so you can see that dive, absolutely magnificent. You can see she had a good starting position, a strong approach, a high, bold, and confident takeoff. She had a nice tight pike shape in the air and a really strong come out, and then she entered the water almost vertically. So she would have just been slightly short of the vertical. And in my opinion, I think that that is a very good dive. So we're looking between an 8.5 to a 9.5. And I personally would put that at about 8.5 because she's slightly short. So I would take out 1 point for her entry, and then she is slightly pushed away from the board. So we can just watch that one more time.
Also the reverse 2.5 somersault pike.
Okay, I've come to our second video. It's one of the Chinese divers. Okay, so what's quite nice is this is the same dive as the one we've just watched, so we can compare them. It's an important aspect when we're judging is that we do comparative judging. So you've got a lot of divers doing a forward 1.5 pike at once. You can say, okay, that one was a 7. Then the next diver goes and you say, okay, that one was a little bit worse, so we need to maybe give it a 6. And that one was a bit better, we need to give it a 7.5. So we judge comparatively. So if we think about that dive, you can see her angle of entry was dead straight. She was completely vertical and her distance was a little bit closer to the board. So I think we're sitting on about a 9.5 for this dive. Okay. We have come to our third dive. Again, we have a Chinese diver. You can see there it's a different dive that we're watching. Also absolutely brilliant. Nice tight shape, nice strong lines, and entering the water completely vertical. So you're probably again on about a 9.5 for that dive. Excuse the absolutely magnificent. Okay, our fourth video. Excuse the Russian that you're going to hear in the background of this video.
Не хватало там, конечно, энергетики, амплитуды, высоты. Для оценки 7.0, как наивысшие, были отброшены, и в итоге в среднем 6,5 пошли в зачет. Это одна из 2 шведских прыгуней в воду.
Okay, on that dive we can see she's done a back 2.5 pike. You can see on takeoff that she's leaning slightly back, and then on entry that she's washing quite a bit. So we're probably sitting in about a good category, which is between 7 and 8. And I would be on the lower end of the good category to a 7, because she's leaning a little bit back on takeoff. Her entry is not vertical, and her overall impression just isn't as good as what we would expect. We're going to watch it one more time. I just want to start a bit closer to when she's starting her dive.
Были отброшены, и в итоге в среднем 6,5 пошли в зачет. Это одна из 2 шведских прыгуней в воду.
Okay, our next dive. Again, there's going to be some Russian in the background.
Коэффициент 2,7. Конечно, надо по идее делать 2,5 вперед.
Okay, this lady has done an inward 2.5 somersaults in tack. And I've put this dive there because it's dives that as a judge in South Africa, you'll definitely be seeing quite often. Her dive was quite beautiful. She made a nice tack position. She went nice and high, but she was quite short on entry. She didn't completely finish her dive, and she wasn't vertical. And also see she didn't completely finish her reach. So again, for overall impression, we're probably sitting on about a 6.5 for this dive. I would say that it's satisfactory, even less, maybe a 6. It's a satisfactory dive, but it's not a low satisfactory.
Коэффициент 2,7. Конечно, надо по идее делать 2,5 вперед.
And you can see she's also got quite a tight shape in her tuck position. This dive has been taken from the women's 1 meter preliminary competition at Budapest in a recent competition of World Senior Championships. Again, it's a dive that we'll see in South Africa, a forward 2.5 somersault pike on 1 meter. You can see she got really nice and high. She had a solid hurdle in her takeoff, and then she just slightly washed on entry. So I'd be sitting about on a 7.5, 8 for this dive. Let's watch it through one more time. Nice high. This video is of Georgia Shaheen. She's one of the Australian divers. Okay, what's really beautiful about that dive is her long legs that make that beautiful line, and then those beautiful pointy toes at the end. And then she comes out nice and early, so she's got that pull through on her entry. It's absolutely beautiful. I think we're sitting there about, we say it's absolutely beautiful. You're sitting in the very good category. So I'm sitting on about an 8.5 for that dive. And watch it one more time. So that's the starting position. See, it comes out early, goes through the water absolutely beautifully. So there you're deducting that slight wash and takeoff and the overall motion. Okay, and we have come to our final video. This video that I'm going to show you, it's to add a little bit of humor, but also for you to make sure that you're watching very carefully for what you see, because I suppose you'll see now. So he's supposed to be doing a 4.5 somersaults. Okay, so we can see on that dive, if we didn't have to give that a fail dive because it was the incorrect dive that he's done, but we could already be deducting there for his takeoff, for his flight. His tuck shape wasn't tight. You can see he got into his dive a bit weirdly with his legs. And then obviously he hasn't completed the dive. He's landed flat, so it's a fail dive. But we could have been deducting for all of those small things along the way. So let's end off by watching that one more time, and then we'll go from there. Okay, so well done everybody for sitting through all of that information. I'm sure that it's a little bit of an information overload. So you're welcome to watch it again, or I hope you've taken some notes down. And then I would just like to ask you, after this, there will be a test that you need to write on the deductions and some of the various things that I've spoken about. So please make sure that you do that test, and then you will have completed your beginner's judging course. So well done, and I would like to thank you for taking the time to learn how to be a judge.